Okay, and we are recording. Hello, welcome everybody to the Stockholm Engineering Leadership Meetup. My name is Camille Sakely. I'm one of the co-organizers. And today is, I guess, the first one we've had in some while. It's been actually a year, and this is the first one that we've had in about a year, and it's a different format than usual. It's digital, as you are all aware, and we're going to try this out digitally and see how it works out. So probably there'll be some technical difficulties as these things tend to happen, but bear with us, and I hope we can get through them. But the one thing I would like to ask everybody is when you join, if you can, please go on mute if you're not already so. And later on, you'll be able to unmute and ask questions, and we'll be able to interact and engage. But until then, please be on mute. Okay. I thought the way I wanted to start this, since it's been a while since we've had this meeting, and since we've had actually a lot of new joiners to the Meetup group. We've also had a lot of first-timers joining to this group's Meetup. So there's lots of new people, and I thought it would be good to really talk about why is there this group? Why did we create this group? So this is kind of our mission statement that what we believed in when we created this about 4 or 5 years ago, and it really started from a few managers that we worked together at Klarna, and engineering managers, and we kind of started getting together, and we started talking about the challenges of being an engineering manager, an engineering leader, and we would you know, what things were working for us and what things weren't working for us as we worked through some of the problems in our organization and with our teams, and we were really kind of, well, we were helping each other, right? And then we started thinking like, okay, what else is out there in the community? Is there something out there that we can engage with, we can learn from, instead of just being in our own little group inside of the company? And we realized, at least in Stockholm, there wasn't really anything out there that was suited for an engineering leader, an engineering manager. What you actually saw, that there was a lot of meetups for technical people. So there was lots of engineering meetups around DevOps or big data or analytics or anything like that. And we were really building a community to help each other and learn from each other and kind of grow together. But that wasn't there for managers and leaders. You kind of had to figure it out on your own, or maybe within the company you were at. What we did have, right, as managers, we have books, we have conferences, we have YouTube videos, but there wasn't really this community. So we ended up deciding like, hey, maybe that would be a good thing to do, not just for us, but for the community, to build a leadership team or leadership community in Stockholm to learn and help each other. I mean, it's kind of, if you think about it, it's the open source model for leadership. At least that's kind of the approach we were taking. Share, learn from each other, and use what we've learned from each other to maybe make, you know, our work and what's happening with in our companies and our teams better. So what we'll be having, and today is the first day in this year doing it. What we're looking to do is right, this community, or this meetup is around talks, as we'll have today. We also have possibilities around mentorship, right? We have a mentorship channel in Slack, so there's engagement there. Also, we'll be looking at creating some meetups around problem solving, where we can come together and talk about maybe some problems you're encountering in your current job or your current team, and learn from each other, right? Kind of crowdsource, if you will, some problems, and really build a community around it, around engineering leadership. So that's kind of the purpose of this group. It is based in Stockholm, but now in how we operate, it's digital. So everybody's welcome from everywhere, and we're happy to have you join us and engage with us around this stuff. Okay, so that was a quick kind of a history lesson, if you will, about the group. And the next thing I wanted to do, and I think this might be the first time we've done this in this group, is actually give a little bit of time to Ileana and this this initiative, Manar, this group. It's a social impact company that works with engineers from the Middle East, right? So that's kind of a quick summary, but I'm going to give I'm going to give Ileana a little time to talk about it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop, and I'm going to.
Yes, I am unmuted. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Here I am. Perfect. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and screen share it. Thank you so much for inviting me here to share our work at Manara. Let me make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. I think you should be able to see my deck now. Are you guys all able to see it? Okay, so first of all, my quick story and why I'm here. I'm from Poland, born in Belgium, grew up in the United States, but ultimately studied Arabic and ended up working at Google out of college, and was then trying to figure out, how do I combine this interest in Arabic, the tech sector, and also social impact? To me, social impact is really important in my work, and I know it's something that a lot of you care about as well. And so I ended up moving to Gaza and running a startup accelerator there that had been funded by Google. If you dreamt of moving to Gaza as a part of your career path, you can raise your hand now. I don't think I'm going to see anyone. It wasn't on my list of dreams either. It was a pretty random choice. My first day there were sonic booms overhead from warplanes. There were literally contractors that had been hired to prepare the space for a war. And there were 60 people in the space all pitching their startup ideas to me. And they were like, don't worry about that stuff. We're used to it. We just want to build our startups. So I was blown away. Google had been similarly blown away when they had come years earlier, which is why they had funded this project. I was supposed to stay for 4 months. I ended up staying for 2 years, including through what ended up being a war, although I left at the worst part. Because the people there are so hungry to be participating in this global tech sector, and we're lacking the ability to do so without somebody in an organization like mine. So long story short, that organization is now very successful. It's been covered in the New York Times, TechCrunch, et cetera. It's called the Gaza Sky Geeks. When I came back to the United States, I started working for Upwork, which is the largest talent marketplace in the world. My engineering team as a product manager was from all over the world. And I was really disappointed to see how few women there were on the team, and diversity in general, and almost nobody from the Middle East. So I started trying to figure out how we could connect people from Gaza and from the Middle East region more broadly to these really great tech jobs that they somehow weren't connecting to. And so that's the story of how Manara launched. My co-founder, Leila, is someone I met in Gaza, and she's now a senior software engineer in Silicon Valley. And I asked her, how did you make this jump, and how do we help more Leilas make this jump? She, by the way, was shocked when she arrived to her first job in Silicon Valley and found that she was the only woman on her team, because in Gaza, more women study computer science than men. So she was used to being in the majority. And that was one of the reasons why we thought this focus on this region, this overlooked region, would be really interesting to companies in the West. And so the way that we do it is that we essentially take this last meter approach, where we work with highly skilled engineers who already have computer science degrees. So this is not a zero to hero approach. And we're just teaching them how to interview, how to be ready for the cultural aspect of an interview at a North American and European tech company. Our referral to hire rate at Google is 67%. So this is super high quality talent. These are the top competitive programmers in the region, people who are naturally leaders. A lot of them want to be working at companies that are quickly growing, at startups, because they have that kind of entrepreneurial tendency themselves. And so what we discovered while we were working on this was that the problem, first of all, is that they don't even realize a lot of these jobs exist. They haven't heard of a lot of these companies. Or if they've heard of them, then they assume you have to be a genius to work there. Like, oh, a genius can only work at Amazon. There's no way I would ever qualify. And so they don't even think to apply. If they do think to apply, their resumes just end up in a black hole. And this happens even when we send them through our friends, through referral networks to these companies. They just don't go anywhere because they're so untraditional, and people don't know how to look at the top universities in the region. Or often, like we were on a call with Stripe a couple months ago, and they said, look, we opened up 6 junior roles, and we got 10,000 applications. We just can't even consider them. So even though it's supposedly roles for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, EMEA, in reality, the company works with a few university recruiting partners in Europe, and that's all they consider. And then the last part is the unfamiliarity with the hiring process. And so they just will show up to an interview if they finally get one. And Layla says, she's like, I bombed all of my first interviews because I had no idea what to expect. I'm smart, I can do the job, but I didn't know how to prepare. And women do study computer science in the region at higher rates than men, but they end up unemployed at incredible rates. The general unemployment rate for university graduates in Palestine is 60%, so it's high, period. We've had candidates who come to us who were actually planning to take a refugee boat to Europe and ended up coming to Manara and getting a job at a startup working as a software engineer instead. So the situation is desperate, but for women especially, for reasons that I'm happy to talk about another time. But this is a really big opportunity because these women would love to be working for European companies, either remotely or through relocations. And so I don't want to take up much of your time because I know that you guys have a really awesome guest speaker today. But I just wanted to make you guys aware that this exists and invite you to engage. We're growing quickly. We are in Y Combinator right now, which many of you have probably heard of. It's the top startup accelerator in the world. And you can join either to volunteer. So our process is almost entirely volunteer run. The way that we're able to prepare these candidates and also make sure that they really meet the standards is through this incredible volunteer network from all the top tech companies in the world and tons of startups. We just had a ton of people from Spotify sign up in the last 2 days, thanks to Matthias, who I think is here on the call. And the volunteers can help for even just 1 hour a month doing something like a mock interview. And it's only once you're passing mock interviews with volunteers from a company like Spotify that we then refer you to Spotify. And so that's how we're able to have such a strong referral to hire rate. And the candidates love it. It's one of their biggest challenges is this lack of networks. And so connecting to mentors, connecting to mock interviewers is what opens the door to the world for them. So that's one way you can engage. Another is by actually hiring our alumni. We just graduated a group that is 100% women. It's our 5th cohort. We started referring them to jobs last week and they're getting tons of traction. There's a lot of demand for this talent pool, but they always like having more options. And so if you go to manara.tech/hire engineers, or you can just email me, you can get plugged in and find out just how to put this talent into your process so they don't end up in that big black hole that I talked about. And if you just want to stay in touch, you can join our newsletter, email me, and I'll be happy to add you. So I don't think we have time for questions. I'll just go ahead and stop there and hand it back to Kenneth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ileana. Okay, that was fantastic, by the way. I think it's a fantastic initiative and it really could make a big difference. Okay, back to, I'm gonna go ahead and come back to our presentation. Okay, thanks again. So moving forward, nope, jumped. Okay, to the speaker today, Manuel Pais is a co-author, an organization IT consultant. I think probably a lot of you have already either heard the name, or if you haven't, you should absolutely go look it up because he's one of the co-authors to Team Topologies. I have to say this book helped me incredibly much in the beginning of last year. I am responsible for the data organization at King. And we had just come together as a new org, and just this book helped me absolutely see how to best organize it. So I was super excited when I heard he was going to be able to come and join us and speak here. So without further ado, Manuel, welcome.
Thank you, Camille. Let me share my screen. But also, I want to say I was blown away by Ileana's story. I think that's super important, the work you're doing. So I'm really impressed. I think it's a great initiative. I'm also very happy to be here. You know, we've mentioned Spotify and Klarna and other companies from whom I've learned quite a lot through blogs and posts and hearing about what they've been doing, in terms of organizing and teams and technology as well. So it's really cool to be here. Thank you. So this talk is called Product Teams Need a Family Too. So it's inspired, let's say, by my three small kids, and the way that sometimes there's the growth of organizations and also problems that happen in organizations sometimes remind me of my kids, or vice versa, and not just like, yes, sometimes they fight, and sometimes there's problems between teams, which can be a good thing, in the sense that if we use that as feedback to understand, there's something we need to change, or we should be looking at, why are there these conflicts or problems with priorities and scheduling and all these sort of things. But in general, it's more about how do we grow, how do we support teams in a way that allows them to grow, in particular to to improve their performance, their productivity, and also the well-being of the people inside the team. And so effectively, what I want to talk about is, okay, if we start from the idea that we need product teams, these sort of cross-functional teams that have a lot of ownership and autonomy, it's not something that we achieve just because we say they are autonomous, right? And so what do we need as a sort of support system around them that makes sense and promotes autonomy, promotes ownership, promotes fast flow of delivery in a healthy way. And so when we're talking about products, maybe many of you are familiar with the work of John Cutler. He talks a lot about product development, but also organization dynamics and all of that. And so, he said this, quite simple but powerful statement, right? That to achieve great products, we need empowered, fully cross-functional teams. So it's a very simple statement, but it's actually quite difficult to achieve. And we see more and more focus on product orientation and teams that are looking and organizations that are looking at focusing on their value streams, focusing on aligning teams to value streams and to customers versus focusing too much on projects and outputs, and focusing more on the outcomes and making sure we're actually looking at the work of the teams in light of, are we achieving the value to the customers? I'm gonna need 1 second. I realize I opened the wrong slide set, even though the beginning was the same. Give me just 1 second. Apologies for that. So give me just 1 second. Make sure I have the last version of this talk. Okay. It's a bit slow on my side to open. Okay. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I didn't have I should have a joke prepared that I could tell, but don't have one. And so I'm gonna just present. Here we go. Not this one. Okay. All right. 1 more second. Okay. So we were here. Okay. Apologies again. So we're talking about, the idea that we need, what we want to achieve are these great products. We need empowered, autonomous, fully cross-functional teams, which sounds really good, but how easy is it actually to get to that state, and what are the kind of changes, because most organizations are not there yet, right? And so it's not something that's going to happen from one moment to another. So how do we set in motion, if you like, the organization to strive for this type of teams? And so, and the reason why this sort of teams are important is also has been, validated through research. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the book Accelerate, which is published by IT Revolution as well as Team Topologies, and the State of DevOps report. So this is work done by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jess Humble and Jean Kim, where they found a strong correlation between high-performing teams, or what they call elite performing teams, with this sort of cross-functional teams that have end-to-end ownership of their products or services. And so one of the key factors is then that we want to avoid, or we want to reduce handovers. So we kind of say as a joke that handovers can kill your flow, right? When there are handovers between teams, when we have a piece of work, whether that's a feature or a release or what have you, that needs to cross the boundaries between different teams, the more that happens, those handovers, the more we're introducing wait times, we're introducing scheduling and prioritization issues, as teams have to work across multiple items and projects, releases, etc. And so if we want fast flow, if we want to be able to respond very quickly to customer needs and just changes in general, we have to minimize handovers and ideally remove most of them. And we see that this is not just something that the startups in Silicon Valley or anywhere else are doing because they have highly skilled people and teams that can do can have ownership of a large part of the product areas, but actually it's something that bigger companies are looking at. So I have this example here, but there are many others. But BMW, for example, where in their DevOps transformation, they're specifically, if you see there, they're specifically talking about end-to-end responsibility in teams to reduce handover. So clearly identifying this as a problem. And what they're saying then is that we want to achieve this sort of teams. If you look at this in sort of the kind of the flow from left to right, or the life cycle of the delivery and runtime, we want teams that have this sort of ownership, that the work doesn't leave this sort of team. So we call them stream aligned, but you can think of this as a product team. So there are a number of reasons why we call them stream aligned in the book, but it's if you're talking about teams working on a single product, that's you could replace by product teams. So they have this end-to-end ownership, and one of the key aspects is that they are responsible for the runtime. So people also talk about build and run teams, right? It's a bit broader than that, but effectively they can take feedback from the running service or product, and they can take feedback hopefully from customers directly, and quickly iterate and include that and apply that learning that they had into the next versions of the product or service. So now this is all kind of our ideal state, right? Ideally, most of our teams would be stream-aligned teams with a clear kind of responsibility around the product or service. But there are some problems, right? As you've definitely most certainly have seen in different organizations. And so one of the things that Peter Newmark was pointing out in 2015, so Peter was working at Prezi at the time, if you're familiar with Prezi, they had a very, they were a startup that grew a lot, and they always tried to keep this sort of startup mentality where each team would have a lot of autonomy and almost feel like a startup by themselves. But even in that scenario, what he found was that we want these teams to be cross-functional, but one of the main problems is that they're lacking competences. So what kind of competences we're talking about? Well, in modern software delivery, you'd expect teams at the very least to have this sort of skills, right? Around coding, of course, testing their work, design, deployment. But that's now no longer the kind of the expectation anymore is much higher, right? We expect them to understand infrastructure needed for their service, infrastructure as code, understand CI/CD, what are the pipelines that they need, how do they deploy their service or product, understanding about operability. So if they're responsible for the runtime, we need to know about monitoring, observability around other, how do we measure performance, all these sort of things, SLOs, etc. So a lot of things that we are now expecting from these teams, from software delivery teams. Security as well. So we're talking about DevSecOps. We're talking about shifting the concerns and building security from an earlier stage. And there are all these competences, and we're still, if you think about it, just talking about how do we build the product in the right way. We're still talking about starting from an assumption that we know what we should build, that we know what kind of features our customers need, what's going to help them. And those cross-functional teams actually need to have ownership around that as well, around selecting opportunities, understanding what are the frustrations of the customers, how do we experiment and try out changes and validate that they actually help drive the behaviors that we want from the customers, or help them deal with the jobs and things they need to do. So for teams to have that sort of competence or that sort of autonomy in that sense, they would need other skills. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but understanding user experience, understanding metrics around the business side, product viability, feature usage, etc. All these things. So another kind of a range of competences. So that's what would allow us then to not just build the product or the features in the right way, but also the right features, right? The right product, and to be able to actually learn what that is. So effectively, what we're saying is, if we want full autonomy or a very high autonomy in the teams, we need all these competences, right? We need all these sort of building blocks to enable autonomy. And there's a sort of tension here where we're saying we want to increase the autonomy of teams to increase the flow, because they will have more ownership of the end-to-end service or product. But if they don't have the competences to do that in the team, then they're going to have to take shortcuts, or they're going to have to, lower or not be as criterious with the quality or the security or whatever it is that they're going to have to take shortcuts to go faster. And so actually, we need to take this as a, think about the two things at the same time. How do we increase autonomy, but also have the right competences in the team? So therefore, the idea that we need a support system for a sort of family for this product or streamline teams, as we call them, help them kind of navigate their needs, the gaps that they might have, in order to achieve that sort of cross-functional end-to-end ownership that we would like. So I talk about this in the sense of moving away from what I call hard team dependencies based on handovers, based on, okay, here's a piece of work, now you do part of the life cycle, whether that's testing or deploying or monitoring, and then it will come back to us at some point. So that's kind of a hard dependency, those handovers that we want to move away from. Which doesn't mean that there won't be dependencies between teams, but we would like those to be more soft dependencies. They're not directly related to the delivery or the runtime of the services. They're related to capabilities that we need to grow. And so in Team Topologies, we talk about 4 fundamental types of teams. So the stream-aligned that I already mentioned, you can look at those as cross-functional product teams. And then there are 3 others that I'm going to talk about: enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams, and platform teams. so the stream-aligned team is kind of the heartbeat. Like I said earlier, if ideally, in an ideal world, most of our teams would be stream-aligned, right? They would be aligned to a product or even a user persona or a type of customer and the value stream, and just produce and deliver on that. So it's kind of what we would like to have, but we need to address this problem of lack of competences, lack of experience, and also the cognitive load, which is something I'm going to explain a bit more in detail, managing the cognitive load of these teams. And also, we need to understand it's going to be a learning journey. Like I said, most organizations don't have true cross-functional teams with end-to-end ownership, because that's actually takes a journey to get there, and takes explicit effort. It's not just because we tell a team now you do everything on your own. That's not how it works. So things are going to get messy sometimes, and that's okay. If it's part of a learning process, it's part of getting the teams to grow and become higher performing teams. And so cognitive load is something we need to be aware of. So it's actually defined by John Sweller, psychologist. For an individual, cognitive load is total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. And we can talk about this in the context of a team, right? Is the same thing, but for the capacity of the whole team. More interestingly, there are different types of cognitive load, which can help us then reason about what should we do to minimize cognitive load. It's interesting because this is one of the things that almost everyone kind of immediately relates to when they read the book or when they hear about the books, this idea that many teams have too high cognitive load, there's too much demand on them. Without the necessary competences or necessary support for them to deal with that. But so there are different types of cognitive load. So there's intrinsic cognitive load. So this kind of relates to all the skills we need to do our job. So it depends on what kind of team you're working, what kind of work you do. But let's say if we were talking about a team producing a banking digital product, for example, in banking with Java application, then they need to know how to program in Java. Obviously, that's sort of a basic skill that they're going to need. So if for any reason they don't have that yet, or they're not experienced, maybe they're junior, maybe they're a new graduate from through Ileana, and they haven't had as much experience. So this is going to take up part of their working memory to learn these things and to find out how do we do these things. And there are many ways that we know are successful in reducing intrinsic cognitive load through pair programming with someone who's maybe more has more experience, through classical training, through communities of practice, code reviews. There are many ways we can think about to help reduce intrinsic cognitive load. So that's in general related to the skills to do our job. And then there's extraneous cognitive load. So this relates to all the tasks that need to happen to deliver our work, to deliver value to our customers, but are not directly related to the problem we're trying to solve. So in the context of this, this example of banking software delivery team, then they have to remember how to deploy the application again, or they have to remember how do I access the test database, or how do I run the performance tests. If all these things require them to to take space in their working memory, then those are extraneous types of cognitive load. So it's kind of related to the mechanics, the things that need to happen to deliver value. And then finally, we have germane cognitive load. So this is related to the actual business problem we're trying to solve, and what kind of solutions we might think about, and all the kind of the business domain that we're working on. So in this example, we'd have to know how bank transfers work, probably how bank accounts work, and a lot more. And so if we have this understanding of these different types of cognitive load, Effectively, what we want to do is minimize intrinsic cognitive load. Like I said, there are a number of techniques that are helpful. We also want to minimize extraneous cognitive load, right? So that might be through automating some things, better tooling, but also with the help of these other types of teams that I'm going to talk about. So that effectively what we want is to leave more of the cognitive capacity to focus on the business side, to focus on the germane aspects. So if you're familiar with the book Accelerate, then you know there are 4 key metrics that correlate to high performing teams, around having short lead times, frequent deployments to production, short mean time to restore from problems, and a lower change fail percentage. So all the teams that have high performance, which also is correlated to better business results for the organizations they work on, they work at, that means that they do quite well on these metrics. And so why am I talking about this? Because if you think about cognitive load, teams that are overloaded, and especially teams that have too many responsibilities, or that they're responsible for too large part of a system or too large product, then typically all these metrics are going to be negatively affected. And so we want to minimize and or at least have cognitive loads sort of under some control. First of all, is acknowledging that this is something that exists, and then addressing the excessive cognitive load, which in some cases might be reducing the responsibilities and the software that the team is responsible for. Other cases, or a mixture of that, with providing better support, providing the knowledge, providing the tools that are going to help those teams. And so therefore we have one of the supporting types of teams are platform teams. This provide good abstractions on sort of lower level services that probably many teams are going to need. So from a more technical perspective, we can think about CI/CD tooling and pipelines and infrastructure. We can think about monitoring, observability, performance. So there are a number of services that most of Streamline teams are going to need. And so if we can provide them an easy way through the platform in which they can do those things without having to be the owners, without having to understand all the details, understanding all of the tooling in detail, by having some useful abstractions, then that can make their life much easier. So there's less that is going to be taking up their cognitive capacity, so they can focus on solving the problems they need to solve. So I joke that one of the services I provide to my kids is feeding as a service, right? Or getting them dressed as a service. Fortunately, now it's only one of the 3 that needs that those services still. The others are more independent. But so we're providing through the platform the sort of useful services that reduce how much the teams need to know about to deliver the value. And it's important to have a common definition of platform. So we adopted this one from Evan Butcher because we think it covers all of the key aspects. So he's talking about a digital platform as a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. So there's a lot here to kind of unpack. But there are 3 things that I want to highlight. So he's talking about self-service, right? This is what's going to enable fast flow, to allow not just to provide those services, but in a way that the teams can consume them self-sufficiently, if you like. It's not a request-based or ticket-based approach where you have one team, again, asking another team to do part of the work and then come back to them, because then we go back to the handovers. So it's not a digital platform if we have still a request-based approach. And then the second aspect I want to highlight is knowledge and support around this platform. So it's not, it's a matter of focus, right? We're not thinking about the platform, it's fundamentally a technical problem, but actually much more of a team aspect and providing the knowledge, providing support around the platform to make life easier for the consumers. We're not focusing on building a big technical platform with all sorts of features without actually understanding and focusing first on, what do the teams actually need, and how can we help them. And finally, arranges compelling internal product. That means that we're not mandating this platform. So in my experience, so I've been in the industry for 20 years. When I started, and for quite a long time, platforms were seen as, well, this is where we put shared services. This is where we put things that now we're going to have all the teams use the same way. We're going to standardize things. And so has a very kind of cost-centric focus in terms of the ownership of those services and tools, but it doesn't take into consideration the cognitive load. And so was trying to reduce costs, but introducing costs in the teams that were consuming the platform, because if it's so hard if it's hard to understand and to use the platform or service, then it's actually making our lives more difficult. It's actually increasing cognitive load. So we want the platform to make things easier, to make the right things, the easy things to do through the platform. And so we need to treat it as a product. We need to look at engagement from our internal customers, which are the Streamline teams in general. We need to look at how do we reduce friction for using the platform. We need to think about the platform as, it's going to go through the adoption curve that is the same for other for many technologies. There will be early adopters. There will be people who are kind of the more reluctant to adopt the platform. So we need to be thinking about this as a product and address this sort of issues. Another type of team are enabling teams, which kind of orbit around Streamline teams. So these are usually usually small teams of experts in some domain. And what they're going to do is help upskill the Streamline teams, help bridge some gaps that they have in their knowledge, in their competences. But they do this in a practical way, sort of like in this image of kind of being the training wheels for the Streamline teams to learn, right? By being, working together with them in a sort of mentoring and teaching approach. It's not about being in kind of ivory tower and telling, well, everyone should do this and everyone should do that. It's actually meeting the teams where they are. Inside the same organization, you might have teams with very different experiences and background, and so they need to work together directly with the teams, understand what are the gaps that they have in a given domain, and help them address that by teaching through training workshops, going through pair programming, going through some examples together, and helping selecting tools, all these sort of things. Effectively reducing the learning curve for those teams drastically compared to if they were expected to do this by themselves. By the way, the domains for the enabling teams can vary quite a lot. The enabling teams can be more long-lived or short-lived as well, depends on what the organization needs. So you can have more kind of technical focused enabling teams around things like, for example, test automation or mobile development or infrastructure provisioning, where they're helping the teams learn about these domains. Or you can have enabling teams in non-technical domains, like how do we do product development? How do we do how do we focus on user experience? A lot of other areas that possibly could benefit from enabling team. It's going to depend, of course, on the reality of the organization. What are the gaps that it exists today? And so finally, and I'm getting close to the end. So the last type of team is complicated subsystem. So this is kind of almost as an exception. We would say if you can avoid this type of team, but there are some situations where you have part of a larger service or product which is very complicated in the sense that things like To give you a couple of examples, face recognition subsystem, or video processing, or real-time trading. These are examples where this might not be the actual product or service that you provide to the customers. It's part of a larger service, but it's too complicated to ask a team to take responsibility for this and the rest of the product or service. And so it requires sort of very specialized knowledge, but in the sense of PhD kind of knowledge, or people have worked for 10 years or 20 years in some very niche technology, these kind of things, where we had to acknowledge that there are some situations where this is needed, but we should try to avoid if we can, because there's a risk of becoming a bottleneck if many teams depend on this complicated subsystem. One interesting example, and if you want, we can talk more in the Q&A. Many organizations today have a machine learning team, which is a sort of complicated subsystem team, right? Creating the models that then are integrated in some service or product. And there are other ways to think about that, I believe. I don't think it needs to be a complicated subsystem team, but that's how most organizations have dealt with it. But so, try to avoid this if we can, but there are some cases where you can't. Like for my kids, if they had shoes with shoelaces, that would be too complicated for them. And so that's they would need help if they had to tie the shoelaces every day. So I talked about types of teams, and finally I want to talk about the interactions between teams, right? That's another key aspect of the book, Team Topologies, is that we can have clarity on the types of teams, expectations, and behaviors we expect from teams, but there's always going to be interactions. And so if we don't have clarity on those, we can still have a lot of problems. And in our experience, mine and my co-author Matthew Skelton, when we are consulting, we saw many times where teams didn't have clarity. When should I collaborate with other teams? When should I be working? When should we be working independently? And so it's good to have clarity on what are these interactions. And so there are three that we think are the core ones. One is collaboration, which is what you expect, two teams working together, but it goes deeper than that. We should have not just a sort of open-ended idea that every team should in theory be able to collaborate with other teams, but effectively when we set up a collaboration, it should have a specific purpose. So the more specific we make it, why are we collaborating? Are we, I don't know, trying to co-design some API that one team is going to provide to another, or are we going through some problems in some end-to-end tests that we need the two teams to kind of sort out what's going on? Whatever it is, we should set the clear the purpose of the collaboration is, the easier it's going to be to say, well, we have achieved the purpose, so we can stop the collaboration. Because collaboration has a cost, right? We're increasing cognitive load of the two teams. We're probably reducing their capacity to deliver while the collaboration is going on. So we set an expectation on the purpose and the duration of the collaboration. Is this going to take 2 weeks? We're going to work together every day. Or is this going to be 1 day per week for 2 months? Whatever it is. So, but we set that expectation up front. The last one that you see is facilitating, the third one, where again we have one team helping another, two teams together, one helps another. So this is more, this is the typical interaction pattern for enabling teams, right? They're usually facilitating knowledge to other teams, helping them learn or solve some problem. But it can happen between any two types of teams. And finally, X as a service is where one team, and this is very typical for platform teams, they provide a service that other teams consume. So it's very much the same thing as when we talk about infrastructure as a service or software as a service. The key here is that because this is an internal service consumed internally, we don't always have the same mindset. So if we think about AWS or Google Cloud, the services they provide are of very high quality in general, and documentation is very extensive and adequate. And we don't expect to have to interact with AWS engineers, right? Maybe if you're working at Netflix or maybe Spotify, I don't know how much AWS usage they have, but in general, you don't expect that there's going to be an actual collaboration with the people at the provider, right? And so internally, for us to say this is a service in this X as a service way, it means it needs to have a high degree of usability. We need to think about the developer experience. It has to be high. It's not just something we throw out there to the rest of the company. We need to think about how do we train people with this service if that's necessary. What is the documentation that's needed, examples, etc. But once that's in place, that means we don't expect to have to interact with the teams, right? They should be able to just consume the service. But we do see a sort of organizations that are too quick to kind of label something as ready for X as a service when it actually has different stages it needs to go through. So when we're thinking about any kind of product, there's the adoption cycle, and we need to go through and identify what are the frictions to use this service and so on. So those are the interaction modes we identified as the key ones. And so when we put together the team types and interaction modes, we start to have the ability also to have a sort of organizational landscape view, right? It's a snapshot in time, as in this example here. Of course, here you only have 5 teams, but we start to be able to have visibility on what types of teams exist, what are they working on, and which teams are interacting with other teams and why. What are we trying to achieve? In this example, we see there's some enabling team on some domain is helping the Streamline team at the top gain some knowledge, gain some skills. We see there's a complicated subsystem that's being consumed by one team and is being, at the top. There's some collaboration with the Streamline team, probably on a new version of this complicated subsystem. It just gives us a kind of much better view of what's happening in the organization. But we need to look at this as a snapshot, right? This is not about, and I don't want to criticize Spotify, but they said themselves the Spotify model that so many organizations talk about was never meant to be a kind of final state. Was the model, the organization that they had at that moment in time, which I think was 2012, and they expected that to evolve, and that's the same thing here. This is a snapshot that we expect to evolve at some point. The complicated subsystem will have a new version, and it's again X as a service. The enabling team might be helping another Streamline team, or might even disappear because now we basically have all the teams with competences in that domain. We need to look at this as an evolution, as the organization as an organism that's going to evolve and address the needs that it has today and in the future. So we think, when we use this with care, obviously, that we're not just trying to find the next kind of ideal model that doesn't exist, but we think these 4 fundamental topologies and the 3 interaction modes are what we need to build and run modern software systems. So this is one of of course, the book, we cover a lot more ground. So today we looked at the topologies, the interaction modes, and a little bit on the evolution of the topologies. But of course, there are many other aspects to think about. It's also quite important for cognitive load and handling cognitive loads that we right size the software for the teams, that we avoid problems with Conway's law. So I'm guessing most of you are familiar, the effect that the organizational structures and the way we set up our teams and communications between them has an impact on the systems that we can create. So effectively, if we don't have that into consideration, we are actually restricting the kind of solutions that we're able to find if we don't understand the correlation between organizational design and the system architecture. We need to sense in the organization for when do we need to change, what are the problems we need to address, which is again something that many organizations fail to do. So they expect that, you know, whatever the latest transformation is going to get them to the ideal state, but that's something that doesn't exist. We need to have instead a sort of ongoing sensing and ways to identify when we need to evolve. And finally, something we call thinnest viable platform, which is related to what I said earlier, that we need to focus on and think of platform as a product. And so obviously it's a sort of pun to the MVP, but for the platform to make it as small as needed and make sure that it's addressing actual needs of the Streamline teams, not just because we can build stuff that we should do it. In terms of resources, we have some, if you want to go more in depth, we have some training. There's a self-paced on-demand training we did with the PMI Institute. It's focused on managers. It's not about project management. It's actually around how do we manage when we have products and teams aligned to products rather than projects. So that's one that's available on demand. We also do live training. Of course, we're actually starting a project to have a sort of Team Topologies Academy online that people can self-serve and take courses on demand. So that should come up soon. And there's a workbook that is, we're at the late stages of getting it ready around Team Topologies for remote teams. So it's a bit more practical ideas, specifically in the current pandemic setting, which we expect, as many people say, that, you know, there will be significantly more remote work even when we're through this, hopefully sooner, as soon as possible. So that's coming out hopefully this quarter still, and will be a free PDF. There are other resources around Team Topologies on the site that you can find, free resources. And in GitHub, there are some repositories where we have some, there's, for example, an example form to assess cognitive load on software delivery teams. And there are other techniques that we use in our consulting work and that we made available for anyone who wants to have a look. I'm almost finished. I just want to say, and I know Victor is going to talk next, I think. So we just created this community page because it was influenced, so it's interesting, and I'm happy to hear Victor. Victor created a book facilitation guide for Team Topologies and other books, which is really great. And I was talking with Matthew and was like, well, what if we have a page that we're basically just bringing together this great stuff that's been coming out related to the book, but we had no intervention. So there's actually now this page for community, and we have the facilitation guide featured there as well as, you know, some other, you know, diagrams and book reviews and other stuff that people have shared. And there's newsletter if you want to keep up on what's going on. We're present on social media. If you just look for Team Topologies, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And we're always happy to answer questions on those platforms as well. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go over too much of my time.
No, not at all, Emmanuel. Thank you very much. So we still have time. Actually, now I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If you have a question, there's a couple of ways I guess you could post. You could, if you don't want to go, you can unmute and then ask the question, and we, you know, Manuel or anyone will be able to respond. The other way, if you don't want to unmute and speak, you can actually put it in the chat of this Zoom call, and we can read it and respond that way as well. So yeah, open for questions if anyone has any. Okay, so I will take the opportunity to ask as the first question. So, Manuel, one of the things that we've encountered when I was working with in my organization with regards to the different topologies, and we at King, we make games, mobile games, and so the Stream-aligned team is usually the game team. My team is data, so we tend to be platform team. However, we have a lot of platform teams that are in their own, so now we have a platform organization. And one thing I've noticed is that in a platform organization, there's also levels there. So you have certain teams that are closer to the stream aligned teams, and maybe they're stream aligned as well. And then you have teams lower. So how do you go about kind of, what would you recommend when that kind of distribution happens?
That's a very good point. So it's effectively it's a sort of Russian doll kind of thing, right? And when we talk about platform teams, it's kind of an umbrella term, where in fact what you would expect is to see inside the platform. You would see either stream-aligned teams, where their kind of service is one of the platform services. So you might have a team that is aligned to the monitoring and telemetry service, and other teams aligned to infrastructure provisioning, and other to CI/CD. So you tend to organize inside the platform as you organize for your kind of customer-facing products. So that's what we expect to see. You might have, and usually platform teams are going to need also some help, from enabling teams. Some of the things that are usually lacking are around usability, developer experience, understanding more how, what do we need to do about that, also product development. But it can be anything, where platform teams are not super teams that are expected to know everything. So effectively, we see inside the platform the same sort of patterns as outside. So therefore, the Russian doll. And also, what you mentioned with the data is also a good example, where typically organizations tend to start on their platform with kind of the things that are more common to most organizations, the things I mentioned: CI/CD, monitoring, provisioning, and then it starts to once they've kind of sorted that out, they tend to start focusing on data APIs and other sort of more business-specific services that are necessary to help the stream-aligned teams working on the product. So, yeah, definitely seen that. And then you inside the platform, for example, those data service might use the kind of inner platform that's focused on infrastructure and cloud and all those things. So yeah, there's a very good example which I can. We published some industry examples on the website. So there's one from a company called USwitch, which is a good illustration, where they even have what they call, I think, affiliate marketing platform, where they realized we shouldn't have marketing people have to answer requests for some things that the stream teams need. We need to provide them with the services so they can do it by themselves and the knowledge. And so that's what they did. So something that is even further away from the more technical aspects. So I'll post that in the chat now.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. I would like to do one about engineering enablement. So I work in Vonage, which is a telecom company. Well, we are a Zoom competitor, sort of, telephony, and we use a lot. We have a lot of teams. So just on my watch, we have around 34 development teams right now, which is a lot, plus operations and other stuff. So my team is actually engineering enablement, inspired by the book. Thank you. I'm not sure we do everything right. Of course we don't. If there, we try to do less wrong daily. Pretty much.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, but the question I have is about the way we operate. Is fundamentally we maintain some platforms where we're trying to create basically platforms as a service, as possible, acts as a service, but without having teams to maintain them. So through inner source model. So as an enablement team, we try to enable all the projects to be community driven and co-maintained, with some supervision, of course, provided by key engineers or key architects or some teams. We try to do that. We try not to attach too much of everything to a specific team, but use inner source as the vehicle to get stuff done. Is that too bad to do that as an approach? It's working so far for us. We went from taking 3 months to get deployed to all production systems in 6 nodes and 3 regions in the OS to do it in less than 3 hours with some of these approaches. We still have stuff to do. Every day we have stuff to do. But is that the bad idea? And just to close that, I'm using this book as a recommendation together with DevOps Handbook as well, very commonly, emphasizing the importance of focusing more on interfaces between teams than on the big semantic aspect of like we need to name every team a specific type. You know what I mean? How bad is this? Am I doing it wrong?
It's working for you, right?
Yes, it
So
is. It is so
it's
far.
not wrong. At the end of the day, is if it's working for you, it's you're achieving your goals, then it can't be wrong. And there's no right or wrong absolute model. No, it's very interesting question, because we do see the opposite. Many organizations focusing too much on the types of teams and not enough on interactions, and they come up with these diagrams where, okay, we have all the teams, but where are the interactions? Because that's what's going to drive the improvements. And about the inner source, that's actually quite good. So what we say in the book is that you need ownership for services, right? You need to know who, with the team, or ideally that is the owner of the service. That doesn't mean that we cannot have a sort of inner source model, which is actually quite helpful if it works well, to allow other teams to sort of self-serve the changes that they need, because with any platform there are always going to be priorities, and very likely you won't be able to address all the needs and all the requests at the same time. So if you have that clear inner source model, the importance is to have a clear set of expectations. How can people change this service? How, do we use, do they need to create unit tests or end-to-end tests? Is there a code review? What is the process? What is the expectation for this contribution to be accepted? If that's clear, I think that's can be a quite powerful model, as you just said, that it's working well.
And just to add on, just to make it's very important, we do this fundamentally for platform specific, that is all about the developer experience and the operation experience. What we do for customer services, there's clear ownership, domain level ownership. And we operate with pull request model, of course, but fundamentally teams own their domains and their service space, but they build it their own, that kind of thing. But this model that I just described is fundamentally to all the other aspects, like even if you want to improve CI/CD pipelines, you can work on that with us. If you want to work on the CLI tools we have internally to accelerate bootstrapping, you can just create features on it, as long a couple of core people that contribute to the project are happy with that.
Yep.
We found that as a way to accelerate, but greatly inspired about everything we do is been dated, clearly understanding the interfaces as well. And we did that very naive in a naive way, which apparently is not that naive anymore, which was basically using things like contribute.md files and establishing some of the agreements or the impact of people's decisions, but encourage people to contribute pretty much.
Yeah, in the book we talk about the idea of team APIs, which I didn't mention today, but effectively, or whatever you call it. Some people have said that's a bit geeky to call it an API, but whatever, clarifying the interface for the teams, and that becomes even more important in the current kind of remote work based approach, where we need to set clear expectations on how do we expect to interact, and you can have information around which service are we the owners, even though we have this inner source model where we accept contributions, we're open to interact with you and to collaborate on some of these things, but here's how it's going to work. Just making that a no-brainer, that we have that clarified, can be very powerful, and it doesn't cost anything. You just have a wiki page or whatever you prefer to use, or MD file somewhere in version control, whatever works to clarify and make it easy for people, for other teams to find that information, where you say, well, I would like to make a change to my pipeline that is run by the platform. How can I do that? And so that can work quite well. And again, going back to the idea that the organization is going to have to evolve, and platform teams won't be able to do everything at the same time, right? So typically, that's something we always say, that you'll have some streamlined teams that need to, at some points, they're going to have to help with the platform. They can't just expect, well, this is the platform responsibility, so I'm just going to for them to do it. Sometimes you can't wait, and the platform cannot deal with that request at that moment, and so you have to take that cost inside the team and then try to move that to the platform possibly. So that's kind of the reality of what actually happened.
Okay, thank you. I think we're actually past the time, but we have maybe one more question if anybody has one. I know there is one in the chat, but does anyone have a?
Yes, can I just ask a question? So thank you, Manuel, and thank you for organizing these things. I think it was very valuable what you said today, and I've been going through the book in the past few days, but I'm looking for a specific. So I'm a software engineer in London, and I work in a telecom, and we have a problem that we want to solve, which is how do we do support? And so I came up with some of the ideas of the book on how we should reorganize the team in order to provide that support for the products that we provide. But the fundamental thing that I was trying to look for was, how you talk about having stream-aligned teams. And the problem that I had was, how do I group the business streams? So the fundamental thing is grouping down these products that I've got. So the problem that I've got is also that I've got too many products, and I've got too few people, right? So I need to group them in such a way that it's cohesive. And so these little products have to be cohesive between themselves. And then you say, okay, well, this is outward facing the customers, for example. And so how would you go about finding what are the business streams within the company?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So kind of the one approach would be to use things like domain-driven design that can help you identify, what are the different bounded contexts and the different business domains. We have some, because domain-driven design is quite as well. What we have something that is kind of a simple way to get started. You still benefit from looking at domain-driven design, but something we call the independent service heuristic. So I'm actually going to copy that into the chat, which are set of to try to identify, look at what are the candidate services that be mostly independent, and then you have these questions that help you think about, reason about, can this actually be an independent service, by specifically thinking, could this be a sort of cloud service, software as a service, would be possibly, organization, even if that's not what we want to do from a business perspective, but asking ourselves those questions, and if most of the answers are yes, then seems like a good candidate. So that's kind of a shortcut, in a way, a faster way to idea. And some organizations have used this quite successfully. If you want a more in-depth approach, then I would go with domain-driven design.
Thank you very much. Yeah, cheers.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm sorry, everybody, but due to time constraints, so we're a little bit over. I don't want to kind of take more of Manuel's time. I appreciate it, though, very much. So I think we're going to pretty much end fairly soon, just to stay on time. So Manuel.
Yeah, just people need to send me a question on social media or through the website. We're happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, there's a couple in the chat, and we'll follow up with those as well, if that's okay. But I guess, like you said, it could be done a little offline. So Manuel did bring this up actually at the end of his presentation, but Victor did. I spoke to Victor. Actually, we chatted a little bit on over email the last couple of days, and I wanted, I guess, to point this out again. This is the a book club facilitation guide for Team Topologies. There's the link over here as well, and I think it's very interesting if you want to kind of dive even more into this book and the content in there. I think it's fantastic. To kind of the last thing here I want to show is you all probably are aware of the Meetup group because you signed up through that, or at least got the access to the link to the Zoom on that. But we also have a Slack Slack group that you could join for this. So you can go to that address and join the Slack community, and we have lots of channels in there. And it's not as active as it used to be, but the plan is this year we're going to become much more active and much more things. So go ahead and join there and engage with the rest of the community. And that's pretty much it. I want to say thanks to everybody that joined. I want to say thank you to Manuel for coming and a fantastic talk. Really very much appreciated. Thanks everybody for joining. I hope this was meaningful. I also want to say thanks to King, who is my employer, who actually helped facilitate this. And yeah, that's it. Thanks everybody. Thanks for your time. I hope we see you again in the next one.
Thank you.
What are you doing?